Hello, I'm Brad Kelly, and you're listening to Method and Madness. This is a show about books, the people who write them, and the labyrinth to be explored between the words.
Have you ever heard about Willie the Weeper? Had a job as a chimney sweeper. He had the dope habit and he had his band. Listen while I tell you about a dream he had.
The Stronghold, also known as the Tartar Steppe, or in the original Italian as I Deserto dei Tartari, sorry to my Italian friends,
Beautiful.
was first published in Italy in 1940. Its author is Dino Buzzati, a multi-talented writer, poet, and artist who made a living as a journalist for the Milanese newspaper Corriere della Sera. One might think his career in journalism would undermine his ability to create imaginative scenarios and convincingly construct strange worlds, but what we have here in The Stronghold is, in fact, an admirable iteration of the kind of lucidly bizarre and groundedly fantastical work first made familiar to us by Franz Kafka. In the book, Giovanni Drogo, after his graduation from officer's training, is called to the remote Fortezza Bastriani, somewhere in a half-dreamt version of northern Italy, where, quote, military formalism has created an insane masterpiece. It is not an enviable post, waiting there at the edge of the desert for a Tartarian threat that, in practical terms, seems as though it will never come. Drogo hopes to leave this posting as soon as he possibly can, and yet months, and then years, and then decades pass. Finally, his entire life is spent waiting for something, held in place at the Stronghold like so many of the other soldiers by a kind of gravity and expectation that he can only glancingly express. And to have a conversation about this great book, I'm having one of the greatest literary podcasters in the game with me. You guys all know him, Jack from Book Club from Hell. Jack, how you doing? And thanks for joining me.
Going well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
I read this book once before, and I was really pleased when you asked me to read it again. For this show. It's such a good book.
It really is, and it's one of those. It's NYRB Classics brought it back, and for people who are subscribed to the Madness portion of the show, I'm going to do the follow-up to this. Part of what I'm going to do is a whole thing on what NYRB Classics is, where it came from, who's behind it, all that, because it's a fascinating publisher to me. They put out these eclectic, weird books. Every one I've picked up has like quickly become one of my favorite books. Like every time I read a book from NYRB, I'm like, this is incredible. How did I not know about this?
Yeah.
And this book was no different than that. So they brought it back in a new translation. Just totally great. Do you remember how you sort of came across it the first time? I know sometimes that's an impossible question.
It was recommended by one of our listeners. I want to say, if M. Shen is listening, I think it was you. Shout out to M. Shen if that was the case. Yeah.
Very cool.
I'm pretty sure it was him. Someone who listens to our podcast recommended it, and it was a great recommendation.
Yeah. Very cool. I couldn't help but notice also. So in the last year, you and I have talked about in the public space have talked about Gerald Murnane's The Plains and Omisville by Ernst Junge, and I couldn't help but feel like there's some similarities between these three books. Does that seem right to you? Okay, I'm not just
I think so. Yeah. Of all of them, this is definitely the easiest to read. Like this is a very brisk book. It's quite short. I'm not sure how many words it is, but it's a really quick read, written really clearly. Like you noted before, he was a journalist, and you can really feel that in how he writes. It's very crisp writing, very matter of fact, which works perfectly for what he's talking about.
Yeah. And then it also allows him to have these occasional moments of sort of that are a little bit more lyrical or poetic or like they go out. But he's always bringing you back. Like they don't last very long, and he's always bringing you back to like the sand and the structure and it comes back to that fixed place. And I think he said, I read in an interview or something with him where he talks about that journalistic quality, and he sort of makes the point is like you can actually pull off more fantastical stuff and keep the reader if you ground all of it. If you if you keep that sort of effective journalistic style of conveying information. People are more willing to go along with you when you have a prophetic dream sequence or whatever, which I think is
Yep.
true. I think he's right about that. Yeah, it got me thinking about how to approach that kind of stuff sometimes.
Yeah, because finishing this book, I didn't consider it to have any sort of fantastical elements, but then actually thinking back over it, there is a prophetic dream where he foresees someone's death, and it actually happens. So there are things like that, but it's told so matter-of-factly in such a journalistic way that it just doesn't trip that part of attention that is normally classified as not realistic.
Yeah, you kind of just it's just sort of immediately it bypasses that frontal part of your brain that might like try to apply like Occam's razor. Did that really happen or whatever? It just kind of goes right past that, right into the deep corners of your brain as an actual fact. I did want to pause just for a little bit longer on this Umasville Plains thing, because I'm trying to think of like what the actual connections are. I mean, part of it is they've created all three of them have sort of created these alternate worlds that are directly sort of adjacent to ours in a way. But they're not the only people to have done that, obviously, and arguably every novel is kind of doing that. But I think part of it for me is the sort of timelessness of it. Like, I know Omisville takes place in the future. The Plains takes place, I guess, ostensibly in the present, sort of.
Sort of.
Yeah.
I guess in the case of the Plains, it just doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
It's not even really a question you'd think of immediately.
Right. And this book, Stronghold, takes place, I suppose, in the past, but really all I'm going by in the past is the like level of technological advancement.
Yeah.
So you could conceivably say like this actually is taking place 1,000 years in the future and not change a single word. Be like, okay, that's, I guess they've sort of reverted and now they use horses and they don't have cars or whatever. But there's no technology in this. There's no electricity. There's no vehicles. There's no, and Buzzati didn't do what he could have done. And this is where I think he really shares something with Omisville. It's like, there's none of that sort of self-justifying explanation of how this place works. Like in Omisville, in Omisville, he's got the, what is it? Where our protagonist lives, the Citadel. You don't know what it really looks like. You don't know, like, there's no like nerding out for 3 pages about how the food supply works or anything. And Stronghold is much the same way. I mean, at one point a kitchen is mentioned, but like we don't know. We would have to presume that there's food shipments coming in, that they're handling their sewage somehow, that they've got, but none of that. Buzzati doesn't spend any time on any of that. And I think it's funny because in a sort of very audience-sensitive approach to writing or a sort of workshop setting, I think those questions would come up and people giving you feedback. If you presented this to beta readers, people would be saying, well, we need to know more about this. We need to know more about this. The fact that Buzzati doesn't answer any of those technical questions is this kind of, it gives it, I think, this sort of dreamy quality. Like it feels like it's floating an inch above the ground to me the whole time in a way that I really like. Like that feels great to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's thinking about this from a writing standpoint, that's like something I think I might try to steal a little bit for something. Just like, how do you get that little bit of separation to make something feel, because it almost puts it in like folktale land a little bit. Like, yeah, it's really cool. I've really loved the page by page of this, and it's fascinating to see how he manages it.
Yeah, you're right. There are a few through lines between those 3 books. I think one of them is also, that dreamlike quality. It's almost like a lucid dream because all of them combine insane behavior to lesser or greater extents. I think Oymersville has slightly less insanity, but more technology that is just there and he doesn't explain. It's like, well,
Right.
I mean, yeah, you can step into the past or just view Julius Caesar speaking as if you're there.
Right.
But certainly with the planes in this, there's a large element of insanity combined with mundanity and this attention to specific details that makes it doesn't feel like it's a dream that you can't understand. It feels like a very definite place. It's just one that's also kind of incompletely filled in. And you have a feeling, especially with the planes, that even if it were all filled in, you wouldn't understand it.
Right. Yeah, it would get even like it would be ultimately incomprehensible somehow. Yeah. And yeah, the planes is particularly that way. There's also something similar to the three of them, I think. Well, Olmsville, we're waiting for the revolution to happen. It seems like kind of one of the sort of pulse beats of the thing. In Stronghold, we're definitely waiting for the Tartars to come. And I think in the plains, I don't know if there's quite the quality of waiting, but maybe it's like it's already happened or something.
I think there's definitely waiting. He definitely wants something because he's got that film he wants to make that he kind of gives up on and acknowledges that he will never make. But he still very much feels like he's searching for something that you suspect will never come. I guess in Oymersville, the revolution comes and it just means nothing.
It's just, It
so it's like he's still waiting. Yeah, that's a good point. I think that waiting aspect and just everything in the book being directed towards some point,
right, and the tension,
beyond
and I think,
the scope of the book is really good.
Yeah, and I think that ultimately, because another thing I got thinking about in this too is sort of, I enjoyed reading this so much, and I probably read it in, I don't know, 3 or 4 sittings. I mean, it's not a very long book, but I could sit down and I would just plow through this thing. I was really taken with it, and yet most of the things that would normally be presented as, why something is compelling, are sort of absent, right? There's no sexual or romantic tension really, except for in like one chapter. There's no real like action. There's no Drogo does, I suppose, change as a character, but not dramatically. It's all kind of, and I think it's part of this waiting, even though I knew we were talking a little bit about this before we started recording about how oddly predictable the book is. Like once you're a certain distance into it, you kind of know that whether or not the Tartars come, I assumed the Tartars wouldn't come, frankly. But I did know that if they came, Drogo would not get to engage in it. He was not going to have his moment of glory. Like, that's too easy. And yet I'm still feverishly reading through the book to get to it. And I think there is something about just that waiting, that like something is going to happen. I mean, maybe it's too easy to say that all of our lives sort of feel like that, like we're waiting for the next thing to happen. And I suppose that Buzzati is sort of dealing with that a little bit. But it's an interesting place to put the motivating engine of the book, that like it's all about waiting for this thing. So
the motivation for the book is very present for Giovanni Drogo, because he's waiting at this terrible post in the middle of nowhere while all his former friends in the city are living lives, meeting women, having children, and he's just rotting away in this fort waiting for the Tartars to come. So he's got that motivation, but you, the reader, especially because if you have any familiarity with Kafka, and this book is just so, like you noted, it's just so obviously indebted to Kafka, it's not going to end well for him. It's just not how these books go. Right. Yeah. I get, maybe it's just morbid interest to see how it happens. There's an element of tragedy to it, in that you can see the inevitability is there, especially on the second reading. Buzzati's just telling you Giovanni Drogo is going to waste his life.
Drogo looked around. In the darkness, he could distinguish only the empty walkway, the outline of the fortifications, the black shadow of the mountains. Clock struck a few times. The farthest sentry on the right should have issued his nightly call by now. It would have sounded from soldier to soldier along the walls. "Stay alert! Stay alert!" Then the call would have raced down the opposite side, fading at the base of the towering cliffs. Now that the sentry posts had been cut by half, Drogo thought, there would be fewer voices to repeat the call, and the entire journey would be over much more quickly. But silence prevailed. Suddenly, Drogo's mind was flooded with thoughts of a desirable yet distant world. A villa, for instance, on the shore of a sea, a soft summer night, charming creatures sitting nearby, listening to music, images of happiness that youth allowed you to contemplate with impunity as the farthest edge of the eastern sea glistened darkly and the sky was just beginning to whiten with the approaching dawn. The freedom to waste nights in this way, without taking refuge in sleep, without fearing the lateness of the hour, letting the sun rise, a foretaste of eternity unfolding before you, without any compulsion to agonize. Among so many beautiful things in the world, Giovanni insisted on desiring this improbable seaside villa. Music, squandering hours, waiting for dawn. However foolish these thoughts may have seemed, he felt they expressed most intensely the peace he had lost. For some time, in fact, an anxiety he couldn't understand had been hounding him. The impression that he was running out of time, that something important would happen and take him by surprise.
And you get the feeling that there's almost nothing he can do about it. And there are a bunch of moments in the book where Drogo is in some sort of situation where he could ask to be stationed elsewhere, or where he could, once when he's visiting the city on leave, he could ask, I think it was Maria Vescovi, the sister of his best friend, whom he was really, really close to. He could reach out to her and try to rekindle their love. And he's always wanting to, or saying goodbye to his mum. And then the moment passes and he's spent the whole thing in his head. And so that just reinforces this sense of inevitability, that he can't possibly get out of this in any other way. I wonder if that's where some of the motive force of the book comes from. Because I agree, it's a weird book in that there's almost no mystery in it for the reader. You kind of know from very early on what's going to happen to Giovanni. You just don't quite know how it'll happen. And there's not much of that tension. There's just kind of this sick feeling in your stomach where he keeps pointing out that life is disappearing one way or the other and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah. So for people who've read it, we're going to spoil this book, but there's not that much to spoil, really. But for people who've read it, he gets to the Stronghold. He's this young officer. He has this, rides his horse up, and nobody knows where the Stronghold is, which is kind of weird. But but he gets there, and he's immediately like, "Oh, I have to get out of here if I can. This is not going to work. This is too remote. I don't get to live in the city." You got to remember he's probably 20, 22 or something, and when he first gets there, whoever it is that he reports to sort of suggests to him, you can leave, but for your own sake, your career, probably what you should do is you should wait 4 months, then we'll do this medical checkup, and then you can sort of you can get out of this as sort of a medical exemption, and then it won't look bad on your resume. It's fair enough. But, that probably makes sense when you're 22, but me as being a little bit older than that, as I read it, I was like, oh, he's going to be there forever. Because it'll be, that 4 months will come, and this sort of goes to the predictability of it. That 4 months will come, and then there'll be some other reason why he shouldn't leave, right? And then some other time period will pass. And then there's this moment where we jump ahead 2 years, and that, my stomach dropped slightly when that happened. I mean, I knew this kind of time was gonna pass, but the rapidity of it and the fact that Buzzati doesn't fill in any of that space, it's it doesn't matter. Those 2 years are irrelevant. Nothing of note happened. Drogo didn't change. He didn't, none of it really matters. You can just skip over 2 years, and then that jump happens multiple times throughout the book, and that's like 4 years. I think it's like 4 years later, and at some point it's just like 15 years later. Yeah, and every one of them, I'm like, oh my god, this poor Drogo's life is just gone. And there's even a point, I think around chapter 13 or 14, when Angostina dies up on the mountain, where, which I want to talk a little bit more about Angostina's death as well, but where Drogo's just not even on the page for like 2 or 3 chapters. He's just not there, because what he's doing in that time doesn't matter apparently, which most of what he's doing sort of doesn't matter. And yeah, so there's this. Buzzati never plays it sentimentally, except maybe towards the end. But this whole wasted life thing really hurts as a reader.
Yeah, it's brutal. There's that line, 15 long, long years, and yet they have passed like a dream. And that's like, that's how he tells you that it's 15 years in the future, and there's nothing else. It's like, what happened in those 15 years? Well, it was just the same as the rest of the book.
It doesn't matter. And this is where, like, deceptively, this book actually kind of affected me more than a lot of stuff I read that I really like, because I had this moment while I was reading it, and I think I have to attribute it to this book, where I had a memory of somebody that, kind of an acquaintance, not a close friend, but somebody I kind of liked but never got particularly close to, and I was thinking about him, and I was like, oh wow, that was 20 years ago when I knew them. And then I was like, wait, 20 years from now? Oh, shit. Like, I'm going to be an old man in 20 years. That's, Yeah. And I think this book put me in that, like, frame of mind where, I'm not one of these people who, like, sort of mourns my impending doom necessarily, but, like, that was a moment I really felt the passage of my life. And I think this book is what did it to me. So if you want to contemplate your own mortality and your own limited lifespan,
it really does make you contemplate mortality in a way that cosmic horror wishes it could. This is more terrifying than any cosmic horror, any horror ever written.
It is.
I think it's chapter 6 where the chapter is just talking about it's just Buzzati talking about how you start out life running and everything looks unlimited and there's an endless horizon in front of you. And then at some moment when your eyes are turned, someone slams a gate behind you and you realize you can't go back.
Right.
And it's just talking about like running and running and running, and then eventually the sun outruns you and the sun sets and you look around and no one else is around you. Done much better in the book, obviously, than I'm relaying here, but it's just so brutal.
Well, and this gets into something you brought up and are emailing back and forth to each other that I want to get into as well, because I think I for a little while thinking about this book, sort of after I'd read it, I was like, is the Tartars actually showing up? Because just to refresh people, I mean, they're waiting for this horde to come in from the north. The Tartarians come across the desert that nobody's ever crossed or whatever, and mostly people think it's ridiculous to think that this will even happen. Like, if you were to go down into the city and ask people what's the Tartarian threat level, people would be like, it's never going to happen. What are you talking about? And the people at the Stronghold, one way as you're reading, you can kind of think, well, this is just them anticipating this is just a delusional thing to give their lives meaning, right? And we probably all do this to certain levels, right? We frame things a certain way so they feel more meaningful to us. And you kind of get lulled as the reader into also thinking it won't ever happen. And then it does. And then for a moment, I thought, like, Buzzati was, for a moment, trying to think through this, I thought Buzzati was almost taking the easy way out by allowing these guys to all have this this meaning in their life at the end, even if Drogo doesn't get it. But then I kind of realized that if the Tartars never show up, then it's very clear to say that being up there was pointless and meaningless, and you just shouldn't do it. And this sort of the moral, to the extent that a great book like this has a clear moral, the moral is like, well, don't do that. Don't go waste your life at the Stronghold. But then the Tartars do show up. And so arguably the Stronghold does need to be there. And if it needs to be there, then people need to spend at least parts of their lives there, positioned there to protect civilization or whatever. And I think that makes it even worse because it's almost like this catch-22 in a way. It's like you could just gamble and waste your entire life, or you could be there at the moment where your culture and society actually does need you. And then the thing you did was suddenly you're a hero, right? Mm-hmm. And that's, I guess, this was a question you asked, but I wanted to hear your thoughts on it. Is Drogo, despite arguably wasting at least most of parts of his life, or aspects of his life, is this heroic in some way, what he's done?
Yeah, it's hard to say because, of course, the book doesn't offer you, like you said, an easy answer. Because when the Tartars show up, I thought, oh, you're not allowed to do that as Buzzati.
Right.
Because it makes everything much, much more brutal for Drogo because there were people who got called up from the city, like soldiers who got called up from the city who'd been serving in the city, weren't sacrificing or wasting their lives up in Fort Bastiani for this. And Drogo, who did everything right, I guess, in a sense, despite spending decades and decades up there, at the last moment falls ill and can't do anything. He can't fight. He doesn't get that glory. And that's even glory in the context of you're never told what threat the Northern Kingdom or the Tartars present. They're not really described at all. They're just this constant longing, or this object in the minds of everyone at the fort, just wanting the war to come so that their time there can mean something. Like they're just desperately waiting for something to happen to justify all that time they've spent there. And I guess in some ways, it depends how you approach it. So this book felt, especially at the ending, very, very 20th century existentialist because, I mean, I'll just say things. I just don't think there's spoiling this book. Like, that's not the point. You'd know what's going to happen from the beginning. Drogo dies alone in an inn, just like middle of nowhere inn, after the Tartars have invaded and there are columns of troops going past his window and he can hear them. And he has some sort of liver problem and is dying. And Buzzati says that he faces the hardest challenge there because everyone has to face their death. And not only is Drogo facing his death, but he's facing a death in the context of a life that's just been wasted. Like he hasn't achieved anything, doesn't have a wife, doesn't have kids, his career has been nothing. Despite waiting all this time, at the moment when all of his life could finally come to mean something, it slipped through his fingers at the last moment. And in that context, it's even more heroic to face your death. So within the, I guess in that sense, and Buzzati seems to be being pretty clear that that's what he thinks, or putting that forward as something that he thinks. Yeah, I think Drogo is heroic. From a more external perspective, the poor guy just wasted his life.
He did.
I mean, I guess you can think of what if he spent his time fat and happy in the city and then was healthy enough that when the time came, maybe he wouldn't be a great soldier because he was still 60 or something, but he could at least go up there and shoot some people and get shot and die violently rather than in his bed.
Yeah, could be a heroic, could be sort of outwardly heroic in a way. Yeah, which he definitely does. He definitely does not get the opportunity to have.
What do you think? How heroic was he?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's tricky, and I think this is the thing that Buzzati is sort of setting up. I mean, is to make you sort of think about this sort of thing. I totally agree with you that I don't think. I think Buzzati's presentation of sort of Drogo's final battle with death, is is, I think that's earnest. Like, I don't think he's sort of mocking Drogo or anything like that. But it's tricky. I mean, I suppose part of this comes from like whether your mindset is more individualistic or more collectivist, because I think Drogo ultimately ends up sort of at the final moment, in that final chapter or two, I think he does find his moment of heroism, but I think throughout his life, I think he's really, the reason he's staying isn't out of a heroic impulse. I don't think. It's not like he's saying, no, I have a duty, and hey, the Tartars haven't come yet, but we're going to be the bulwark of civilization. We're going to, if they do, we're going to be here. A lot of his reason he stays is just sort of inertia. Like, at first, it's like, well, I want to make good career moves, so I'll stay for a little while. And what's 4 months? And he's kind of right about that. What is 4 months? I mean, it's worth trying to see what it is or whatever. That makes sense. And every one of his decisions kind of makes sense. But as time goes on and other opportunities present themselves, and there's even one point where he's like relieved that he's staying because it won't disrupt he doesn't want to have to go through the stress of disrupting his life and that kind of stuff. So it's like I think the decisions he makes are not, throughout the book, to stay aren't heroic, because I don't think his motivations are. I think at some point he's doing the easy thing. And I don't know if the easy thing, I don't know if you can do the easy thing and also be heroic at the same time.
Yeah, he's very passive through most of the book. Yeah. And then the handful of times he tries to be active, he's just slapped down immediately.
Yeah, it does. There's no, and yeah, there's you can't go against the stronghold for sure. But this is not, this isn't me strictly sort of putting Drogo in this position where I'm sort of sneering at him, because I do definitely feel for him, because I think the situations he puts that he's presented as being in are super relatable. I mean, I don't know, if you haven't stayed a little too long in a job you didn't like, then you're you're living a different life than me, where it's just like that I'm sure the like self-improvement podcast types have like a term for this, but that thing where you're in a situation, it's not terrible, but it's just like not as good as it could be, and so that fact that it like satisfies your basic needs kind of keeps you locked in it, because to make a change, you're gonna have to like make some choices and take some risks and put yourself up, whatever. That's a very familiar feeling for sure. And Drogo's in that. And then the moments, but then you see his sort of forays into like city life, where he goes back on like a 2-month leave, and you're mentioning Maria, this sister of his good friend Vescovi, and they had Drogo and Maria had this very flirty relationship, and before he left, and one of those things that in the presumed sort of social norms of this book, that they're kind of destined to be married in a way, right? If he'd stayed in the city, they probably would have gotten married. And he goes back and he just can't make any connection whatsoever happen, right? And not only that, but like the whole city kind of seems empty. Like he can't really seem to get in touch with his friends, or they're all going off and doing something, and his mom doesn't really care that he's there in a way, which is sad. Like that whole thing is just so sad. You sort of can't. Yeah, if you leave for long enough, you kind of can't go back and expect it to be the same. Yeah.
But even with his mum seeming not to care, it seemed to be more. She did care, but her life also continued without him when he left for. I'm not sure how long it was at that point, but he'd been away for a while.
I think he was gone for I think this was after he'd been gone for like 2 years maybe, or maybe 4 years. But yeah, he'd been gone for some number of years. And it's not that she didn't care, but I remember there's a very touching moment where he comes home late and she doesn't wake up.
Yeah.
Used to be if he came home late, she would be like paying attention and she would hear his footsteps and she was tuned into that. And now he's just some guy coming into the house. It's like, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. She got used to him not being there. I think it's part of that passivity of Drogo's that you were mentioning earlier, where he sort of expects that the life of everyone he knew before leaving would remain the same while he was up at the fort, and that the time he's spending waiting for the glory that he's sure will come when the Tartars invade and he can finally fight them, like that, the reason that he's staying there, because that's just sitting in the distance for him and for everyone else at the fort, and everyone else also secretly harbours this hope that the Tartars are going to come tomorrow, or they're going to come soon, and then finally this will all have been worth it. And he's not, throughout the whole book, he never really, until the very end, seems to come to terms with the fact that I guess just like bluntly, opportunity cost exists. That you can wait for the potential for that glory, but everything else in your life is also going to continue, and you're not tending to those things.
Yeah. And those moments where there's a handful of moments where, other than the final, when the Tartars actually do come, there's a handful of moments where everybody gets sort of stirred up about them potentially coming. Right? And I loved this setup in the book of this huge plain that you can look out on. And, potentially you're going to see whoever the raiding hordes from the north from way across these plains. And it was also cool when they finally did come that it seemed like it took them forever. Like once you could see them, it seemed like it took, I don't know what it was, but it seemed like days of them traversing the desert to approach you, right? You had all this time. And the sort of symbolic or poetic aspect of this thing where like you see differences just as far out as you can see, like something appears. At one point there's lights, but early on there's and I think this is during Drogo's like first time when he's actually commanding some men. They see something out there in the night and nobody's really sure, and it turns out that it's just a lost horse of some kind. And everybody freaks out because this means the part of them that all wants the Tartars to invade so they can have their moment, they assume that like, oh, well, there's like a scouting party or something that has lost their horse, and then this horse has wandered into us. And the way that the excitement about that like passes through the whole stronghold, passes through all of these men is really interesting, even though it's a total, and I think Buzzati did this on purpose. It's like, there's not any reason to think that this horse has anything to do with anything. But that's anything that's mysterious or questionable at all to them is like evidence for this thing. Which
it's such a good setup for it, because it's that combined with the monotony of military life, where just everything is known and everything is planned out. You know exactly what's going to happen. Where something like a horse is taken to be just something so incredibly important. And then interestingly, the horse question, like where did the horse come from? Like whose is it? Is never resolved.
No, we have no idea. Yeah.
It just disappears.
Yeah. And I'm really glad that he did that, because it does, if it landed as like a pedestrian exploit, because it actually even still could have actually been a Tartarian horse.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. Who knows? But also that moment of that horse showing up, and then was it Lazari, I think?
Yeah.
Goes and gets it, right? They're all admiring it and looking at it and like trying to explain it to each other and all this. And then Lazari, who's under the command of Drogo at the time, goes off and basically fetches it. And which makes sense. It's like, if it is a Tartarian horse, you probably want to get your hands on it. Maybe you can figure out where it came from, whatever. But doing that, Lazari really pushes up against the boundary of this very strict bureaucracy that's holding everything at the stronghold together. I'm gonna insert a bit of. I read a passage and recorded it. I'm gonna insert it somewhere around here about this whole bureaucratic thing. there's this very convoluted arrangement of passwords that they
Yeah.
have, which apparently is a thing that militaries used to do. I mean, I always thought it was sort of like a Bugs Bunny sort of thing, but apparently this is actually how military detachments have worked in the past. And so there's like this convoluted thing where, you know, if you go from one part of the stronghold and you cross part of the plane to the other, there's a different password there. I can't even follow it, and I think Buzzati intended it to
Yeah,
be,
I think he intentionally made it really absurd.
Right.
And I think when it was being explained to Drogo, he just mentions offhand as like, yeah, he was pretending to understand.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah, Drogo's just like, he lost track of it.
Yeah.
Tronk, I think, was another guy at the time who was explaining it to it, and Drogo sort of just like drifts off and pays attention to something else. It isn't right, repeated Tronk. The changing of the guard should be done first at the new redoubt, but the colonel doesn't want that. Giovanni looked at him, amazed. Could it be that Tronk was allowing himself to criticize the colonel? The colonel, the sergeant major continued with profound seriousness and conviction, certainly not in an effort to correct his last words. The colonel is perfectly right from his point of view. No one, however, has explained the danger to him. The danger? Drogo asked. What danger could there possibly be in traveling from the Forteza to the new redoubt by that effortless path in such a deserted area? The danger, repeated Tronk. Someday something is going to happen in this darkness. So what should be done? Drogo asked, to be polite. This whole rigmarole really didn't interest him. Once upon a time, the sergeant major said, quite pleased with the opportunity to flaunt his expertise, the guard at the new redoubt would be changed 2 hours before the one at the Forteza. It was always done during the daylight hours, even in winter, and the business with the password was simplified. It was needed to enter the redoubt, and a new one was needed for the day's guard and the return to the Forteza. 2 were sufficient. When the off-duty guard was on its way back to the Forteza, the new guard wasn't yet in place here, so the password was still valid. Right. I understand, said Drogo, abandoning the efforts to follow him. But then, Tronk related, they got scared. It's rash, they said, to let so many soldiers circulate outside the walls when they know the password. You can never know what will happen, they said. One soldier in a group of 50 is more likely to turn traitor than a single officer. Right, agreed Drogo. So they decided that only the commanding officer should know the password. The guard now sets out from the Forteza 3/4 of an hour before the change. Let's take today. The change is scheduled for 6 o'clock. The guard for the new redoubt left here at 5:15 and arrived there at exactly 6. A password isn't needed to leave the Forteza because the soldiers form a detachment. To enter the redoubt, they needed yesterday's password and only the officer knew it. When the change is completed at the redoubt, today's password goes into effect, and again only the officer knows it. It lasts 24 hours, until the new guard comes to make the change. Tomorrow evening, then, when the soldiers return to the Forteza, they should arrive by 6:15 since the journey back is less onerous, the password is again changed. So a third password is needed. The officer must know 3, one for the outward journey, one for the guard duty, and one for the return. All these complications exist to keep the soldiers in transit from knowing. But here's what I think, he continued, without worrying whether Drogo was paying attention. If only the officer knows the password and he, let's suppose, gets sick on the road, what do the soldiers do? They can't force him to give it up. They can't go back where they came from because the password has already been changed there. Has anyone thought about this? And if secrecy is the object, don't they realize it makes 3 passwords necessary instead of 2, and the third to get back into the Forteza the next day goes into effect more than 24 hours before? Whatever happens, they're forced to keep to it. Otherwise, the guard can't get back in. So yeah, it probably doesn't even ultimately make sense. But, I mean, in one of the biggest, sort of most, for me anyway, one of the most poignant moments of the book is Lazari brings this horse back. The time that he took to go get the horse means he now does not know the password. And so when they ask him the password, he doesn't have it. And another soldier, who I think is sort of a friend of his, or at least they're friendly, ends up shooting him because he doesn't have the password, even though he knows it's him. And there was something really like this actually, it struck me as a kind of Kafkaesque bureaucratic thing.
This felt the most Kafka of the entire book.
It did, right? Because that's something that would be, you know, an early draft of the trial might be something like this. And yet I found it really affecting. like really, because everybody's life up there is sort of meaningless, but like, man, Lazari's is more meaningless than anybody else's. Even it's just like you got shot in the face by a guy you knew because you didn't know a word. Like, what are we doing up here? Like, what's happening? And yeah, I found that really sort of affecting for that reason. And then also, Lazari's like the only guy in the whole book that tries to do something other than what's the regimented expected thing, right? He's he tries. He's like, and it made sense. Like, I'm gonna go get this horse, and he ends up dead for it. And I'm sure we could dig into like what Buzzati is trying to tell us, you know, about life or reality or whatever there. But man, I just found that to be. It also took it out of. There's an element of this book. And I love it so much. This is not derogatory at all, but like there's an element where it can get a little Wes Anderson-y, and I love Wes Anderson too. But like this Lazari getting shot like brought all like the harsh truth or harsh reality of things back to me, right? Like it's not just
it doesn't feel like the rifles are all loaded with blanks.
Yeah, exactly. Like there are actual stakes here, and like, the lives are actually being wasted. But you had mentioned, so there are ultimately 3 deaths in this book of people, you know, named characters. There's Lazari, who went and got the horse and gets shot for it because he doesn't know the password. And then there's Angustina. I think it's Angustina, not Augustina, right? Yeah, Angustina.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Drogo at the end. What did you like? What did you make of these 3 deaths if you kind of set them next to each other?
Yeah, I found it interesting how these deaths differ, and I'm sure Buzzati was aware that people would be comparing them because the whole book feels pretty deliberate. Because like we just said, you've got Lazari's death, which is. I think that came before Angustina's death. Which is, it's regarded almost not quite as a joke, but no one really seems to care, to the point where I think one of the high-ranking officers there congratulates, like, while they're picking up Lazari's body, is congratulating the guy who shot him. He's like, yeah, that was a great shot. I always knew it was a great shot. Fantastic.
Right.
And I think it's mentioned too, his grave next to Angustina's grave, and Lazari's grave is pretty ramshackle. It's not particularly impressive. And Angustina dies because the Northerners, a small group of them has come up to, I don't know, to have a look at the borders or the perimeter or something like that. And they climb up this mountain, and they want to put their flag in it so they can I mean, by the end of the book, we understand it's like it actually had a military purpose. They're probably trying to take that territory so they can go up there and assault the fort from it.
Right.
And so the people from Fort Bastiani are scrambling to try to climb up this mountain or get onto this peak before the Northerners do. And Angustina is one of the people going there, and he wears just like bad boots. He wears really fashionable boots for it, where he should be wearing heavy boots with nails in them because it's in winter and it's icy. And there's the whole thing about him competing with I forget his name, with his superior officer there who just hates him. And he's trying to pretend the whole time that his feet don't hurt because he has the wrong type of boots, and that he's not cold because he hasn't. He won't put his coat on because the other soldiers haven't put their coat on. He doesn't want to look like a weakling. And eventually he dies up on the mountain, and all of the soldiers around him and everyone in the fort just regards it as such a heroic death, and they kind of envy him. You know, if only we could have died like Angustina.
Right.
Died while he was still. I think Buzzati notes he wasn't actually that young when he died, but everyone thinks of him. Everyone remembers him as being this like young man with a young body, handsome. And then you have Drogo's death, which is alone. He's achieved nothing. He's sick. He's old. And people think about his death even less than they think about Lazari's death. because they kind of remember that as an event at the fort. They remember Angustina's death because it was heroic, and Drogo is completely forgotten.
Yeah.
And
you don't imagine Drogo's grave's going to be next to Lazari and Angustina's. It's going to be down in the city. No one's ever going to visit it. Yeah.
And there are so many different ways to try to categorize these different deaths, and it's too good a book to have one easy explanation that you can use to line them all up. Because in one way you can look at them as to what extent were they obeying the rules, doing what they were supposed to be doing. And Angustina and Drogo both followed the rules the whole time, and Lazari didn't. But you don't get a nice clear distinction that way, because Drogo is forgotten, whereas Angustina is remembered.
Yeah, and Angustina's death comes from, like, the things he's doing. It's totally unnecessary. Like,
yeah.
Right? To sort of like give him a hero's death, it's sort of like, I don't. He's playing some internal status game. Like, there is actually nothing really heroic about Angustina's death. No,
but it's in comparison to everything else at the fort is so boring that all the soldiers there, that deep down think, "Oh, I wish that was me on the mountain." Right, freeze to death.
Yeah.
One thing that I found interesting is, in this book, you do get a sense that fate and destiny are real things. Mm-hmm. Especially because Drogo predicts Angustina's death. He has a dream about him. Which seems to prefigure him dying on the mountainside. And you do wonder if maybe Buzzati is saying we all just have our destinies and have to reconcile ourselves to that. And Drogo's destiny was to have done, at least in the eyes of the military, all the right things. He stayed at the fort for decades and decades and decades, and was always prepared for the invasion from the north. And he just was not fated to have glory. Yeah. And Angustina, even though he, like you said, he just behaved in kind of a silly way. Like, he didn't need to wear fashionable boots to try to climb up a mountain in winter, but he did. And he didn't need to be trying to push himself constantly to keep up with the head of the group, and he didn't need to refuse to wear warm clothes so that he looked like he was really tough.
Yeah.
But he was fated for glory, even though that glory is kind of dumb. Like he didn't achieve anything, because they didn't beat the Northerners to the summit. The whole thing was just complete failure.
Yeah, they didn't beat the Northerners to the summit, and he actually probably, you think about it, Buzzati avoids a lot of these practicalities, but you sort of think about it, it's like, well, now they got to like carry his body back. Like, it's like actually kind of a problem for no gain, Mm-hmm. But they do seem to be, they definitely do seem to be three, not comprehensive alternatives in that there are no other ways that a person could die in this setting, but they do, Lazari, Angustina, and Drogo, they do seem to be like three different looks at like varying levels of meaningful deaths and the sort of ironies inherent in them, right? Yeah, Angustina's the hero, but also like
it was just completely useless.
And Lazari's to me is kind of a tragedy. Lazari's death, there's no. Oh, and the only actual consequence of Lazari's death is that because it happened under Drogo's command, there's a moment later when Drogo still has a little bit of still potentially could have the will to get himself out of the
and because his mum tells him to.
Yeah, right, yeah. But the Lazari thing is like a black mark on Drogo's. That seems to be the only consequence, is that Drogo now has this little little note in his resume that's like, well, he was in charge, and that didn't,
and someone managed to die at Fort Bastiani.
right.
Actually, this makes me think back to your question near the beginning about the plains and Oymersville particularly. is looking at these three deaths, I get the feeling that I get with Oymersville, where it's almost a mirage quality, where you can see there's so much detail, there's so much going on, you can feel that this is important, but the closer you look, the more confusing it seems. Actually, just the less of a hold you have on it, the tighter you try to grab it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's definitely true of the Stronghold as like a setting. Like I can't. It's interesting. We get sort of descriptions of it, but and maybe this was different for you. I still never ended up with like a picture in my head, not a coherent picture of the fort in my head, right? Like I could imagine them standing on the edge and looking out, but like I can't really get a sense of like. It's very difficult to actually get a sense of where we are, and I think that's partially intentional. It's one of those sort of like it becomes a kind of, you know, if you have a dream and you're in a building and you open one door and you're in a room and it, like that kind of makes sense, and then you open another door and then you're in the kitchen of your childhood home somehow. Mm-hmm. Like there's a little bit of that. Like it doesn't really like if you try to map it out, stuff connects in ways that it shouldn't connect. I felt like the structure of it was a little bit like that. And then the book itself is not entirely of that quality, but there is a sort of an aspect where if you drill down far enough down into any detail, it all ends up being kind of like runs through your fingers a little bit.
Yeah, there's a fragmentariness to almost everything. Because it's like with the fort, there are certain almost still images of it that I can see. I know that it's yellow. He really wants to belabor the point that it's a yellow kind of structure.
Right.
Yeah, there's the picture of the fort as you're ascending up the road to it. There's the image of looking off the edge of the fort into the valley. But yeah, it's, you know, and then there's Drogo's room. But these are all like they're all just these fixed points, and you never really see anyone move between them. They're just there. No. Yeah, and the same goes for characterization. Now that I think about it, because you have certain characters like Simeone, who's the who in a really great part of the book, he's got a better telescope than the regulation telescopes, and he sees movement like way off on the horizon, and he says it like this must be the enemy, and no one else but Drogo believes him, or no one else. Here's the complexity. Everyone else kind of believes him because they all deep down think. Like, we're going to finally have our glorious fight one day, but they also don't want to let themselves get excited because most of them have been waiting there for so long.
Right. Yeah, you don't want to get your hopes up, and then you also don't want to look like a fool, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't, you know, because if you've been there for 30 years, how many moments have there been like this where it's been like, oh, well, they're coming, you know? So you don't want to look like a fool, but you also want to leave that door open because it could be the thing that makes your life meaningful.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that Simeone the stuff with the telescope and studying the horizon every single night, and you know, oh, that light moved a millimeter out there, so something is happening. Yeah,
but how Simeone came in reminds me of what you were saying about the fort, because he is characterized, but it's also in that very fragmentary way because he just appears. Mm-hmm. And it's just said, or Drogo likes these aspects of him. He doesn't like these other aspects of his personality, and that's it. He just appears, and he becomes a really important character. Mm-hmm. And basically, every character occupies that kind of role. How they appear, there's just an assumed backstory,
right?
But you're not really given it.
I mean, I couldn't tell you. This is another part of the mystery of. This feeds into the mystery of why this book is so good and so interesting to read. I honestly, okay, so Drogo, I can't really distinguish most of the characters from each other.
No, I had to actually write, like I've got their names written down in front of me because besides Drogo, they're very interchangeable, and Drogo's not interchangeable just because you spend so much time with him. If you were occupying another character's point of view, Drogo would be very forgettable.
Right. And I think probably the one character who does end up having some distinguishing characteristics is probably, is it Simeone?
Simeone,
the guy with
or
the telescope. Simeone,
the
like that.
telescope man, because he ends up becoming important enough in the fort that he moves the sick and dying Drogo out of his room so he can just put other soldiers there.
Right. But yeah, he has it. So he has this telescope, and then it's interesting because the fervor that comes from it, then he and Drogo seeing the lights, and it's funny that Drogo notes that it's noted that Drogo doesn't really like him all that much, but Drogo is definitely invested in this telescoping, looking at the horizon thing every single day or every night. And then a word comes down from on high that nobody's allowed to have a more powerful telescope than regulation anymore.
Yeah. And they note the regulation ones are rusted and they're just terrible. Like, you won't see anything through them.
Right. And then Simeone immediately is like, yeah, we weren't seeing anything. There was nothing out there. And Drogo kind of hates him for it, which you can kind of understand, because Simeone, it's like, well, it's just because the high command told you something doesn't mean it's true. That's like Drogo still has a little bit of individuality, right?
And it turns out he was right.
He was right.
Like, it actually was the Northern Kingdom.
Yeah, they were building a road out there, and they probably could have went and, shot a cannon at it or whatever. But then, we're kind of wandering all over the place, and that's great. But then it takes, after they see him building that road out there, it takes 15 years before the Northern Army actually attacks. And so, and that 15-year gap is just skipped over.
Yeah.
Drogo's, having daily life up there, and becomes I believe by that point, sort of second in command of the fort at that point, through no perceptible accomplishment other than he's just there.
Yeah. It is a brilliant piece of characterization where Buzzati, he gives you enough to infer that, Drogo just became more senior because he was there and didn't cause problems. But he never says it. He just says, 15 years down the track.
Right.
Here we are.
Yeah. Well, I kept thinking about this book sort of in relation to my own life, which I felt like I did more than I normally do in a book, and yet it's such like a distinct or otherworldly kind of book at the same time. But that is, I think, I mean, I've had, career jobs and things, and there definitely is a thing where if you just like stick around and you don't screw up too bad, you don't even have to necessarily be very good at what you do, and you'll just steadily advance. And I mean, I've literally experienced this in my career where I've had this moment where I'm just like, well, the next promotion, I don't actually want to do that. Like, that's the next, I'd rather do what I'm doing now. And the tendency is everybody, 99% of people, they kind of just take that next promotion, that next advance in responsibility or whatever. And that's kind of how the whole world turns. But there is some value in just taking a moment being like, do I actually want to do this? Because if you don't, if this environment you're in is not the one you want to be in, allowing yourself to do that advance and get that seniority and spend that time, that's just going to lock you in even more, right? Now you're going to have more on your plate. You're going to be making more money probably, which is great. But you end up even more sealed into this thing you're doing, and that more opportunities to do things outside of it get more and more cut off. Because that's the thing. If Drogo, he starts advancing up the ranks. Even if he were to move to a different post, you assume that he'd move to a different post, and then he's not going to know any of the people. He's not going to know anything to do. It's going to effectively be some kind of career setback. And certainly, if he leaves the military, he doesn't have an ability to do anything else. Right? He's not. I don't know what he could do if he were to leave the military. It's not clear he has any skills, or maybe I'm thinking about this in too sort of realistic economic terms, but
no, I think you're really onto something.
LinkedIn analysis, LinkedIn literary analysis. Yeah.
It's part of what makes the book so terrifying, and maybe it's just the time of life in which you read it. Because I think if I read it when I was 19, it wouldn't have unsettled me in the same way. But you get to a point in your life and you realize, oh well, just so many of those options I just took for granted when I was much younger are gone. They're gone. I can't take those anymore.
Right. Right.
I sort of have a more limited number of options open to me, and I'm kind of at the point where I need to pick some of the things I'm already doing and just try to get better at them, rather than when you're a teenager and you just try new stuff all the time and see what sticks. Mm-hmm. He's in this book so good at talking about the inevitable movement of time and that there is nothing you can do about it. You just have to make the best of it, which Drogo didn't do ultimately.
No.
He's almost like he's not as extreme in his helplessness or passivity as someone like Stoner. That I think that's a good study of being extremely passive. I know there'll be a portion of the audience howling that I've even just named that book because some people seem to get very, very worked up when I say
It's so divisive. Yeah.
I like it. I don't think it's the most incredible thing I've ever read, but it's a good book.
Yeah. No, I'm the same way. I'm sort of like the moderate position where it's it's a really good book. I don't know.
Yeah, but
you know what's crazy? Just on a quick note about that, because I've been doing this like reading into NYRB classics. Apparently, Stoner, after they put it out, sold 5 million copies, which is an insane amount.
That's insane.
Yeah, and Edwin Frank, the editor of NYRB, said that in Holland, where for some reason it became incredibly popular, it was like the best seller in the country for months, and the only thing that knocked it off was a Dan Brown book was published.
That is crazy. Was it written by John Williams? Is that
John Williams?
Yeah. Was he alive for that? Because it'd be the most stoner thing in the world if he were dead when it really blew up. Okay,
he was
perfect.
dead.
No, that's the most stoner thing that could have happened to him.
Yeah. Edwin Frank said that John Williams' widow made more money in the 3 months after they released Stoner than John Williams had made in his entire life combined.
That's crazy. I'm glad a book like that can sell 5 million copies. Mm-hmm. It's a really good book.
It is a really good book, and I thought that was encouraging. Like, really, like a book that's not like just some warmed over existing IP can sell 5 million copies. That should get everybody like, yeah.
Especially a book with as infuriating a main character as Stoner.
Right,
which is part of the magic of the book, that you kind of want to strangle him and make him do something.
Yes. Yeah.
And Drogo's got a bit of Stoner to him, I think.
Yeah, I didn't think about that, but I think you're right. There is this overlap between the two. There is this like, both of them have this thing as a reader. You kind of want to poke them with a stick, like do something. Like, do something, man. Like, anything.
They're a bit too phlegmatic. They could just take a bit too much punishment or boredom.
Right.
Just sitting there stoically, sucking it up until it's too late.
Yeah, and then at a certain point comes and you can't do anything. And that's when one of the brilliant things about, I mean, one of the ways that I think Buzzati makes this so effective, and we've already talked kind of about the sort of jump cuts, but I am fascinated by them as technique, and part of the way that they're so effective is this thing we talked about. He doesn't fill in any of the context between now and then, but also the fact that each one that happens is a lot bigger than the last one. It's like we jump ahead 4 months, and then I think it's 2 years maybe, and then like 4 years, and then 15 years.
15 years.
It's like, and so each one of these is like, I said my stomach dropped. Each one, my stomach kind of dropped a little bit further. But there are other ways in which time works a lot differently in this book than how time really works. I don't know that that's true, but than how time works in other books. There's this quality in which, and once I kind of grokked that, and then going back through my notes and my highlighted sections, I really started to see it. There's this way that time is measured very differently than it might have been if Drogo was living in the city and he had this sort of dynamic life where it was marked out by milestones of, getting married and having a child and the death of loved ones, all the good and sad things that sort of stake out the sort of architecture of our life, right?
Yeah.
And Drogo doesn't really have any of these, except career, but even that feels a little bit meaningless. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And then time ends up getting, interestingly enough, time ends up getting measured out differently, I think. There's these big jump cuts, but there's also something about how time is often measured in how, I don't even know exactly how to say this, as though the stronghold, the facility itself, is the thing that's kind of keeping track of time. Because people will probably remember it, there's a passage where Buzzati is describing the coming out of winter, coming into spring, and the whole facility is like
is this with the wood
creaking and
beams?
bending. Yeah, it's like creaking and bending and breathing and moving and that kind of thing. And you get the sense of like, that's how, it's almost like, is spring happening, or is this the stronghold doing this and that makes spring, right? It does this like kind of weird distortion of of causality almost. And then there are a bunch of things like this where you feel like the stronghold kind of has its own sort of feel, its own effect on time, or its own sphere of time. The snow on the terraces of the Forteza finally softened and feet were plunging into slush. The sweet sound of water suddenly arrived from the closest mountains. Here and there, along the peaks, you caught sight of vertical white strips sparkling in the sun. Every so often, soldiers would find themselves humming, as they hadn't done for months. The sun no longer sped past as before, eager to set. It began to slacken its pace midway in the sky, devouring the accumulated snow. It was useless for the clouds to keep hurtling from the icy north. They couldn't produce any more snow, only rain, and the rain did nothing but melt the little snow that remained. Mild weather had returned. In the morning, indeed, you could hear the birds' voices, which everyone thought he had forgotten. In recompense, crows no longer gathered on the plateau before the Forteza, waiting for kitchen scraps. Instead, they scattered through the valleys in search of fresh food. At night in the barracks, the wall mounts where backpacks were hung, the rifle racks, the very doors, even the beautiful solid walnut furniture in the colonel's room, every piece of wood in the Forteza, including the most ancient, creaked in the darkness. At certain moments, sharp cracks that sounded like pistol shots were audible. It seemed as if something had splintered. The soldier would be awakened in his bunk and prick up his ears, yet he managed to hear nothing but more creaking, which recurred throughout the night. This is the season when a stubborn yearning for life revives in the aged beams. Many years ago, in happy days, it coincided with the youthful flux of heat and strength, and clusters of buds sprouted from branches. Then the tree was cut down. Now, when spring arrives, a surge of life, infinitely diminished, still awakens in each of its fragments. Once upon a time, there were leaves and flowers. Now there is merely a vague memory, just enough to cause creaking, and then silence returns till next year. This is the season when the men of the Forteza begin to entertain curious thoughts that have nothing to do with the military. The walls no longer offer hospitable shelter, they rather raise the specter of imprisonment. Their bare appearance, the black lines of drain pipes, the sloping edges of ramparts, their yellow color, none of these features responds in any way to the new frame of mind. For instance, the cistern that is dripping, that Drogo, the first night, he's like, how could anybody possibly sleep with this going on? And then eventually it becomes this comfort as it's sort of clocking out the seconds, you know. And that specifically, I had this moment in my own life. So we used to go to my grandmother's when I was a kid, as many people do, and you know, they lived out in like rural Michigan, and I'd go there, and you know, this was no shade at my grandparents, but I found it extremely boring. It was just like, we're just going to sit there. My parents would talk to my grandparents about like who had died in the last month or whatever. And it's just incredibly boring. And, you know, there's no toys or anything. And I remember she had this grandfather clock that you could hear tick off. If everybody stopped talking, you would hear the seconds tick, right? And it used to drive me crazy being able to hear it. Like, being able to hear the clock was very unsettling to me. And then I found out later, because my dad then bought a similar clock. I found out later that he found it very comforting, those seconds ticking. And I always was like, try to figure out like what that distinction is. But now I'm seeing it in Drogo, where it drove him crazy because it was like marking out the moments of his life that are being lost. And then later on, it's this sort of like reliable pace that now, hey, this is how my life works. It works one drip of the cistern at a time. And I thought that was a brilliant way of showing us how Drogo's relationship to his situation has changed. How he's kind of like come to accept it in a somewhat fatalistic way.
Combination of that and the movement of light through a little window along his wall, and how there are several times in the book when he's lying in bed watching this light both track the movement of the day and reveal different things in his room. Yeah, yes. Buzzati's really clever in the different ways he draws your attention to the passage of time and what it means in different contexts.
Right. He also uses a metaphor at one point of like time as being like flipping through the pages of a book, and that every once in a while you can stop and you can look at how many pages you'd flipped through. That was really effective. But then there's also something about how the landscape itself has its own time, moves sort of differently there. Actually, I shouldn't even say differently. It's almost like it doesn't move. Like the landscape is sort of like infinite, doesn't really ever change. It's always the same. 15 years later, it's the same as it was 15 years before. And you know, there's almost a suggestion that like what they're looking for out on the horizon is, yes, the Tartar army, but also like some exception to this, to eternity or something, right? The monotony, like this thing, it's the same forever, but what if this one little thing changes? And in fact, when Drogo gets sick, I didn't notice this until the second time kind of going through, I believe when Drogo gets sick, some weird stuff happens out in the landscape, and there's some rock slides and the pinnacle. Yeah,
there are the avalanches because winter's ending, wasn't it?
Right. And so there is this like something's changing now, and you know, I guess it's like a little bit of sort of expressionism going on, right? Where we're like the exterior world is having some correlation to the interior world of Drogo, but yeah, there's all these wonderful little touches about time. And if you read it thinking about how is Buzzati handling time, you'll see it like in almost every chapter. He's doing something to mark it out in a different way. You know,
and there are some really beautiful ways he does that. It's like even the first time Drogo is traveling up the road to the fort and asking people about where's the fort, and no one knows where it is. There's just this one little line about how he's going up the hill and the shadows are growing longer, and eventually the shadows overtake him and he has to stop by the road. It's just everywhere, this sense of time constantly moving on. And this is where he really feels 20th century existentialist. How the world around you doesn't care. How like the Tartar steppe is indifferent to you, time is indifferent to you, and it's up to you to make these events that would give your life some sort of content. And if you don't, your life is going to resemble the Tartar steppe. It will just be the like, well, 15 years could pass and it's sort of the same as a month passing. Right.
And yeah, it'll be dependent. And then, yeah, if you put too much of your sort of dependency on things happening outside of you, then yeah, you don't. Yeah, it ultimately does end up having like these kind of the sorts of, you know, moral lessons or whatever wisdom in it is something you could pick up in a self-help book or something, which is like, seize your life, and you gotta like take risks and whatnot. There's the time thing is fast. The time thing is absolutely fascinating to me. I'm gonna go into it. Got me to the madness portion of this so I can embed a little tease here. I'm gonna go into a bunch of different literary conceptions of time. I don't know if you're familiar with Mikhail Bakhtin and his whole chronotrope thing. Just different ways that time has been perceived in literature over time, going all the way back to sort of the like ancient Greek quote unquote novels and how they conceived of time, and how this
That is really interesting.
Yeah, so this is Buzzati's, what Buzzati's doing is a very modern thing, a very modern perception of how time could work, or the way we actually directly experience time. I don't know if it's more realistic necessarily than what was being done 2,000 years ago, but it's certainly interesting, and it's an approach to time that wouldn't have been even considered by a writer 300 years ago, probably. And yeah, I found it really, really effective, and really, this is one aspect that really got me thinking about like my own writing. Is like, how can you convey time in a different way? Because I think, not to get like too pretentious about it.
Oh, go off. Go for it.
I do think that part of what makes a writer's style is their sort of theory of time, right? Like, it's a real sort of like dorm room stoner conversation to be like, well, what is time, man? Maybe time isn't real. But the thing is like, these are questions that plague like physicists and philosophers forever, and we're not really sure, and every time I think we feel like we've defined time, it doesn't feel like it quite captures what it actually is. And so I think when you read like a great book, it carries with it a theory about what time is. And maybe it's just the same as the last book you read, but I think occasionally you can come across something like Buzzati where it's actually very strange what he thinks time is, without it going into like time travel territory, right? This isn't like a some kind of speculative fiction. I mean, I guess it is a work of speculative fiction in some ways, but it's not. We're not breaking any laws of physics here. We're not doing anything crazy. It's more of a perspectival thing, like, think of it this way kind of thing, rather than. And I just found it really really effective.
Yeah, I think how I'd categorize how he treats time in this, it's very much that subjective experience of time. How, sure, you can look back over the past 10 years of your life, and when you really think through everything that happened, you think, oh, that's a long time. But at the same time, just by virtue of the fact that you are here on the other side of it, it feels like just no time has intervened at all. I mean, it's... Yeah. There'll be times, when you return to some place that you were last at 10 years ago, and it's it's like that. You're suddenly 10 years older,
right?
And it feels like that 15 long years, and it's passed like a dream.
Right.
Section.
Well, and there are these the subjective qualities. It's funny. I remember when my wife and I first got together, we were talking about like jobs we'd had and stuff, and we both had like a bunch of different jobs doing a bunch of different things. And I started like kind of laying out like one job after another that I'd had. And then I realized that there was like a contradiction in there that like couldn't have happened. And I still, weirdly enough, I still can't figure it out. And it's not worth like getting into the details of it. It's boring. What's interesting to me is like, I have this story in my head about like what happened to me. And it's not true. Because there's an element of it that like I got some wire crossed, and these two things contradict each other. They couldn't have been happening. And yet I can't unwind it somehow. I'm sure if I like went back into like my tax returns or something, I could tease it out and be like, oh, okay, well, this happened, then this happened. That makes sense. But in my head, I have this weird little glitch in my understanding of my own sort of... It's not that big of a deal, other than it really drove home to me when I realized that how subjective this all is, right? Like, yeah, my memory's got this like little wrinkle in it somehow, and I don't know why. Maybe because one aspect of it was more salient and exciting to me than the other. I don't know, but it ends up being. It drove home to me like exactly how subjective this stuff all ends up being. Like, your memories are memory and time obviously being very much related to each other. They're slippery. They leave out all kinds of stuff, and if we didn't recording this, we were just having this conversation. A year from now, we would remember like 2% of it or something.
Oh, that's being generous. Like, speak for yourself. It'd be much less for me.
Right. That's probably for me too. We would vaguely remember that it had happened, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I have spoken to Brad at some point in the past few years.
Yeah, exactly. So it's very strange. Yeah, it's very strange how that works. And this book does get me thinking about all of these things, because it gets me thinking about time and how it gets spent. "The Tartars," the sentry Andronico dared to say, as if it were some brash joke, while his face turned deathly pale. Half an hour later, at the new redoubt, Lieutenant Moderna ordered a blank shot from a cannon, a warning shot, as was prescribed in case an armed contingent of foreigners was seen approaching. A cannon hadn't been heard there for many years. The walls sustained a slight tremor. The report broadened into a slow roar, the foreboding sound of destruction among the cliffs. Lieutenant Moderna's eyes turned to the flat profile of the Fortezza, expecting signs of agitation. The cannon shot, however, didn't cause amazement, because the foreigners were advancing precisely over that triangular portion of the plain visible from the central fort. Everyone had already been informed. The news had reached the most peripheral tunnel, where the rampart that ran to the left terminated against the rock face. It had reached even the sentry who guarded the underground storeroom for lanterns and masonry equipment, and could see nothing, sealed off in a dark cellar. He trembled with impatience for time to hurry, for his shift to end, so that he too might climb up to the walkway to catch a glimpse. Everything continued as before. The sentries remained at their posts, pacing back and forth in the prescribed space. The clerks copied reports, scratching their pens and dipping them in inkwells with the usual rhythm. Yet unknown men, whom you might reasonably presume to be enemies, were coming from the north. Men curried animals in the stables. The fireplaces in the kitchens emitted smoke phlegmatically. 3 soldiers swept the courtyard. Yet over everything hung an intensely solemn feeling, an immense suspension of thought, as if the momentous hour had arrived and nothing could stop it. Officers and soldiers breathed the morning air deeply in an effort to feel the vibrancy of youth. The gunners began to prepare the cannons. They joked among themselves as they worked around the guns, treating them like animals that needed to be kept docile, watching them with a certain apprehension. Perhaps after so long a time the guns wouldn't be capable of firing. Perhaps in the past they hadn't been cleaned with sufficient care and some remedy would need to be found. In a short while everything would be decided. Never had couriers dashed upstairs so fast. Never were uniforms so neat, bayonets so shiny, bugle calls so military. The wait hadn't been in vain. The years hadn't been wasted. The old Fortezza would serve some purpose after all. Now a special bugle sound was anticipated, the signal for the general alarm, which the soldiers had never had the privilege of hearing. The buglers rehearsed the famous signal during placid summer afternoons in their training, conducted outside the Fortezza in a remote ravine, so the sound wouldn't reach the fort and cause any misunderstanding. They rehearsed it more from excessive zeal than anything else. No one imagined it would be of any use. Now they regretted they hadn't practiced it enough. It was an extremely long arpeggio, rising to a very high note. Some of the playing would probably be off. Only the commanding officer of the Fortezza could order the signal, and everyone's thoughts were fixed on him. The soldiers were already awaiting his arrival to inspect the walls from end to end. They already saw him advancing with a proud smile, staring everyone straight in the eyes. It had to be a good day for him. Hadn't he spent his life looking forward to this opportunity? Colonel Phillimore, however, remained in his office. From the window he looked toward the north, at the small triangle of empty plain that the cliffs didn't hide. He saw a series of black points moving like ants, precisely in his direction, toward the Fortezza. They truly seemed to be soldiers. There is a couple other places I wanted to go. One is I think it's worth touching on briefly. So, apparently, according to the translator of this, the recent translator, which his name is Lawrence Venuti, I think. Where is he in my notes? Lawrence Venuti, I believe is his name. Yeah. Let me just read this little bit from him, from his afterword. Quote, "Gradually, the interpretation of Buzzati's novel underwent a radical shift in Italy. While continuing to be read as a humanist allegory of timeless universal truths, it came to be understood as a critique of the Italian fascist regime presented in a symbolic form that evaded censorship. The historian Ennio Di Nolfi was among the first to advance this reading in his 1986 study, saying that the book is considered not political, but rich in political meanings insofar as it expresses the dissonance and detachment of a certain type of culture and environment. Many Milanese intellectuals linked to that newspaper that Buzzati worked for in regard to official pronouncements. Okay, so to be continuing on here, to be clear, Buzzati rarely advocated or criticized a particular ideological stance, whether in public or in his writing, so that throughout his career he tended to be regarded as apolitical. In an interview he gave the year before his death, he denied that the, quote, philosophical schemas of fascism were connected to his main theme of heroism. I guess, so, and Venuti goes on to draw links to the fascist regime in Italy, and this as being on some level a political allegory. And, you know, if you're completely unaware, and not that I know Italian history all that well, but this book came out in 1940. This was Mussolini time. This was the Italian government had, after, I think at the end of World War I was what they call the Fourth Italian War of Independence, and that sort of unified Italy under what was nominally at least a democracy. And then not that long after, Mussolini had made a bunch of moves to essentially secure power and make him like the only person who could make political decisions, whatever. Anyway, Buzzati is living under fascism when he writes this book. And the idea here, the question I guess I'm sort of dancing around is this book like a critique of fascism, and do we care? What do you think about that?
I didn't really see the critique of fascism in it. It didn't.
Me neither.
Like, okay, yeah, he was writing it in the late 1930s in Italy, so he wouldn't have been unaware of events happening around him.
And he's a journalist too, right? So it's not like he didn't notice. Yeah.
But I didn't really feel that here. I do wonder to what extent it is. I mean, at least for our current moral understanding of the world, Europe in the 1930s and 40s is really the fixed point against which we seem to measure everything.
Right.
I mean, we got started ignoring, say, Christianity to a greater extent, which was our former North Star, and then it just became fascism or not being fascism.
Right.
So maybe part of it is just like today or in 1980 or whenever that observation was made, like in the current moral order, comparisons to fascism, particularly if something was written, in one of the special years, just come naturally. Maybe I'm trying to be generous because I just don't really see it. I think it's a bit of a reach, especially because, as you pointed out, the guy was a journalist writing this book in the late 30s. Like, if it were to be about fascism, maybe it'd be a bit clearer. I mean, sure, he's trying to hide it because you don't want to get shot, but
right.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there were other works like On the Marble Cliffs by Junger, also like veiled anti-fascist allegories, which were much clearer. Like when you're told that is about fascism, it's quite clear. It's not hard to find it in there. Whereas, I feel like any interpretation I would offer linking this to fascism would feel like a real stretch versus it is about time and one's relationship to time.
Yeah. No, I'm definitely with you. I mean, I don't need it. I don't know. Like, I'm very rarely do I feel like thinking about something in terms of a political allegory or whatever. Does doing that actually add to the reading for me? I do think that there is. Well, see, but this is where it gets weird. So, like, okay, so I want to think about this for a second. This is why I'm leaving it towards sort of we talked about a lot of this stuff I really wanted to talk about this book, and this is sort of like, it's worth thinking about for a little bit. I have a lot less enthusiasm for this part of the conversation. However, I think there is this is where it sort of gets weird, because it's like, okay, there is definitely in this book this notion of like Drogo shouldn't subject himself to the order of the military. And one reading is like, because once you do that, if you kind of give up your freedom to this institution, then it decides what the sort of course of your life is, and you end up kind of wasting your life. Like, that is definitely one reading, and the reading that me as a sort of at least like a small L liberal kind of person, that's the reading that I want to have, right? That's like, yes, it's about the individual, making their own choices and living their own life and whatever. And yet there's somebody needs to be manning the fort up there, apparently. And so there's this like dichotomy where like it could be, if this is a political allegory that Buzzati's saying, he's like, it could be saying like, hey, I understand that you want to live a sort of freewheeling life and be your own individual, but somebody's got to man the fort. Like,
yeah, you're right. Yeah, because at the end of the book, he declares pretty concretely that the threat is real. The threat was real the whole time.
Yeah, so he could be kind of saying something like, hey, I know it doesn't, like, I don't like fascism either, but maybe not that maybe we need fascism, but like also like you can't have no order. Like we can't have nothing. You can't just be like, drinking wine under a tree all the time. Like that's not gonna function. So I don't know. I'm sure he had opinions about Benito Mussolini. I think I can think.
I mean, that's it's not much of a stretch. It's just anyone living through that time, or almost anyone, would not be indifferent to what's happening.
Yeah. I just don't think. I don't think it lands super neatly. Whatever he may or may not be saying about it in this book, to me, is I think a little bit lost to the historical vagaries. Like, I don't know, I just don't know enough about, like, supposedly even like the yellow thing has something to do with it. I guess that's according to Lawrence Venuti. So that may be true, maybe not. But I'm definitely with you. Like, I think it's more. I think the existential stuff is more interesting, and I guess I think that as we hear this sort of every once in a while it flares up on Twitter or whatever. Maybe it will after we release this episode. This whole like all art is political or whatever, right?
Oh, I fucking hate that.
I hate it. I so much hate it. And what the thing is, what I don't think, when political stuff gets into a book, what I like about that sometimes is when that stuff is used as a sort of metaphor to talk about something more tangible about life or whatever, right? Like, where we're using that as like an example to set up moral conundrums or to accelerate the stakes in something. Like I like, if I want to know, well, I guess here's what I'm saying. If I want to know about Italian fascism in the 1930s, I don't read Dino Buzzati's The Stronghold. I go and I read a book about Mussolini. Like, what
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and I'm not that interested in that period personally, but if I did want to know, I wouldn't be like, well, the first thing you should read is The Stronghold by Dino Buzzati. I don't think you actually need to know any of that. You don't have to know anything about Italy to read this book and get, I think, what Dino Buzzati is trying to get across to you. I don't think any of it's necessary. But
yeah. If I would only think of Italian fascism because I know when this book was published. If this book were published, 50 years before, for like just obvious chronological reasons, you wouldn't think of it as an allegory for fascism. But I also probably just wouldn't assign it any real political valency at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it does seem to operate outside of, in a way. I mean, I know they're military men in this book, but like they don't have any political. None of them seem to have any political interests or political obligations or.
Yeah, they're pretty indifferent. Because once again, what the Northern Kingdom is never specified. They're the enemy, but the people in the fort seem fairly indifferent as to what they represent, what they believe, who they are, beyond the fact that they offer the possibility for heroism and for glory, which is the thing keeping everyone in the fort. That and inertia. I get the inertia is almost from them always reaching towards or holding on to this hope for glory.
Yeah, that's like the final piece that locks it into place for them, right? It's like the inertia is one thing, and everybody, it's unless things are bad, you're not going to have the motivation to change. But it is like that potential opportunity for glory is like the last thing that kind of locks it in, right? Because you always have that hope. Because if you go back to the city, then and you leave the military or whatever, then you're never going to have that opportunity for glory. At least that would be the perception. Whereas as long as you stay up here, you never know. Maybe the barbarians could come over the hill, and you could be a legendary hero, kind of.
Yeah. And then in that sense, the book becomes a strange... I mean, you can read it in many ways, which is one of its real strengths, but you can really read it as talking about hope. And of course, hope is really powerful and can be really wonderful, but it can also, if it's misplaced, you can just waste your entire life. At a fort and have nothing to show for it.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that I've thought about, that in relationship to this book, but also in like relationships to my own life. It's like hope is great, but like it's like I don't know, it's like there's like a difference in hope of like the hoping that you'll win the lottery and the hoping that this thing I'm doing will work out, right? It's like they're different. Like one, you're actually like pushing towards something, you're trying to make the thing happen, and maybe it won't, which to me feels...
Buy more lottery tickets.
Right, yeah, you could buy more lottery tickets. Yeah, just spend all your money on lottery tickets and maybe it will happen. But that there is this like, those are different species of hope, I suppose, right? And
Yeah. Of just giving yourself up completely to fate.
Right, just like, I hope it happens. Like, it's not... Yeah, if you just sort of, I hope it happens, it like... Spoiler alert, it never does. The hope is just that it will.
That's the thing about this book that makes it... there are actually a few aspects to it which make it sort of inscrutable, because actually for some people in the fort, it's not what you just said. Like, they just stayed there for 30 years, and then finally the war came. Because it'd be almost easier to settle on a message if nothing happened, but it's where the twist comes, I guess. In a book where otherwise you know from the start what's going to happen, that the northern soldiers show up.
No, you're absolutely right. And this brings me to sort of a question or a notion that we sort of talked about near the beginning. How would Kafka have done this ending?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because obviously this is, like, Buzzati obviously loved Kafka. Like, constructing shrines in his bedroom with Kafka's hair and bits of his bones in them. Love of Kafka.
Yes, yeah.
But where it diverges from is really interesting, because, I mean, to kind of answer your question in reverse, it's, what makes this book ultimately more interesting than just, it was a great piece of Kafka worship. Because it is more than that. And I think part of it is the warmth. Like, there's a real human warmth to it. Which makes it much more emotionally affecting. So Kafka, I love Kafka, but it's not particularly emotionally resonant. Like, it's too cold and anxious and inhuman for me to have that sort of immediate emotional connection with. Whereas with Drogo, he's... To say he's not very well... I wouldn't say he's not well characterized. I would just say he's characterized so sparing or so sparsely, and I think intentionally blankly, that you don't have complex. He's not a complex character, but you care about him quite a lot because you spend time with him, and he seems likable enough.
Yeah, I care about Drogo more than I care about Kay in the trial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess he has a full name as well.
Right. Yeah, that helps.
Yeah, but there is a real warmth to this book. And while it is mostly written in a fairly journalistic register, as very matter of fact, he will have these occasional moments of laying on a bit more sentimentality, and it really hits because it's so sparely used.
Yeah. That could be
particularly at the end of the
versus-
book where he just he takes off the brakes. And
oh yeah, I mean it gets into sentimental and I love it, but it gets pretty sentimental at the end actually.
Yeah, and
for
because of the build up and the constant frustration, it really works.
Yes,
whereas I think if he weren't as controlled through the rest of the book, it just would have been a bit much.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that.
So I think Kafka would have been much colder. It wouldn't have had that warmth, and it just wouldn't have been as good if it were colder. And I don't think the Tartars would have shown up at the end.
No, they wouldn't have.
I think Drogo would have just fallen down the stairs or something and broken his neck, and the book would just end.
Right. Yeah, they wouldn't have. I think that's the big thing is the Tartars would not have shown up, or like one guy who was a Tartar would have shown up or something. You know what I mean? Something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He would have to make the situation as absurd as possible.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. Yeah, those particular changes from what Kafka would have done really, really make this book, really set it apart. Yeah. I'd be interested to know what someone's experience reading this will be like if they had no familiarity with Kafka. Because I suspect
that's a really good question.
Some of my enjoyment of those aspects was just because of my expectations, because so much of this book is so Kafka that when he steps away from that, it felt really cool and unexpected.
Yeah. Well, it's like Kafka's like a genre almost, right? And we're gonna see what Buzzati does in that genre, sort of. And what he does is really satisfying, I think. Well, Jack, let's kind of end it there. I think I really enjoyed this conversation. Great book, people. If you haven't read Stronghold, we have not ruined it for you. Go read it.
Yeah, just read it.
Yeah. But quick, Jack, plugs. Where can people find you, and what's coming up next on Book Club from Hell and for Jack?
Yeah, so podcast Book Club from Hell. Probably the people listening to this are at least aware of the podcast. Very likely. I think we share most listeners between these two shows.
Yeah.
But yeah, we read weird books and talk about them. I also get on authors like Brad fairly recently to talk about their own work. I just recorded an episode with Capitalissimo of the Tukey's Mag Sidebar podcast and a bunch of other shows about an amazing journey into the psychotic mind, which is by Jerry Marzinski and Cherry Swiney, which is basically a book about how to treat schizophrenia. The operative question being, what if we talked to the voices and asked what they wanted? Yep.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Interesting.
We got to talk about that. Written by a guy so Jerry spent decades working as a psychologist in prisons, talking to psychotic prisoners.
Oh, fascinating.
Which is pretty hardcore. And then Sherry, the other co-author, hears voices in her head. So
cool.
The book is as unhinged as you think it is.
Excellent.
Additionally, I got a novel coming out in October with Bonfire Books. I was saying to Brad before we started recording that still tossing around ideas for the title. So it's sort of hard to plug without a title, but stay tuned. The more details will be coming out shortly about that one. I'm putting together hopefully the last draft of it now.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to that one being out.
I'm looking forward to that, and I'm going to have you on to promote that and talk about that for sure. I'm really looking forward to that. It's going to be a big year for indie lit in 2026, I think.
Yeah, each year bigger than the last.
Yeah, that's
hopefully.
right. That's right. Okay, well, Jack, thank you so much. I'll see you on the next one, I suppose. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's always fun.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely.